Okay, so good morning, everyone. So in our previous discussion, we've finished the formulating the hypothesis. We're in. I hope you've learned how to formulate your own hypothesis, and sana meron na rin kayong mga topics in mind. And sana nailagay nyo na yun sa Excel file natin na nilagay ko last week. Kasi again, I will be checking your topics and then I will approve only one na i-workout nyo for the research proposal. Okay, so doon sa previous topic natin, diniscuss ko doon kung paano ba nagka-come up yung researcher with a particular topic or a hypothesis. For example, you have the inductive model or the deductive model din, pwede nyo rin gamitin. And then napakarami nating other techniques na pwede rin gamitin if wala talaga tayong maisip na topic, like exploring those non-experimental studies na already published or even yung mga experimental research na already published, just by checking yung limitations and the recommendations nung mga author na nagsulat ng mga published researches na yun. And of course, binigyan ko rin kayo ng mga databases na pwede nyo gamitin kapag nag-gather na kayo ng literature for your chosen topics. And on the last part of the discussion, of course, meron akong bonus tip doon wherein you can use the sci-hub.se in case na meron mga files na or mga PDF or mga full text article na hindi nyo ma-access, diba? But to remind you, class, hindi lahat na-unlock nun. Merong ibang mga articles na siguro mataas yung security or sobrang encrypted yung mga files na yun, hindi ma-unlock nung sci-hub. Okay, but you can check naman kapag halimbawa may nakuha kayong article na may DOI, pag na-unlock niya, edi sort. Kapag hindi, edi hanap kayo ng panibagong literature na pwede nyo magamit for your topic. Okay? So, now in this lesson, so kung meron na kayong na-formulate na topic or hypothesis, the next thing that you will do is, of course, you need to design a procedure to test that particular hypothesis. Diba? So starting from this lesson, we will be dealing with various concepts that will help you in writing your chapter 3 or the methodology. If it's CVSU form and style, methodology yung tawag natin. If it's APA kasi method section lang yung tawag natin or method. So again, in CVSU form and style, which is yung gagamitin natin for this for your research proposal, methodology. Okay. So we will start with the basics of experimentation, and then after the academic break, we will be dealing with how to solve those problems that you might encounter in experiments, specifically how to control for extraneous variables and confounders. And then after that topic, yung solving or controlling extraneous variables, we will be dealing now with the different experimental research designs. We will start with the basic between subjects design, and then we have the factorial design, the within subjects design, and then the small n design. So meron tayong from here hanggang the last topic, meron pa tayong 8. So after this one, 7 topics na lang yung natitira sa atin sa experimental side. So after discussing the designs, of course, the last part would be the common statistics na ginagamit natin in experiments. Okay. So now let's start with the basics of experimentation. So ano ba muna yung objectives natin for this particular topic? So the first one, you will learn the 2 types of variables that are the focus of an experiment. So nababanggit ko na to sa mga previous discussion ko, but hindi ko pa siya formally ini-introduce sa mga slides ko. Diba? Yung independent and dependent variable. So we will discuss independent and dependent variable in detail in this lecture. And then the next one, you need to understand how these variables are defined in an experiment. So later on, I will introduce to you the two definition na ginagamit natin in research. We have the conceptual definition and operational definition. And ano ba yung relevance ng operational definition in a particular research or in an experiment. And then sa part 2 ng ating lecture, we will be dealing with the psychological assessment related concepts, specifically we will be evaluating the operational definitions using the concept of reliability and validity. So, yan yung i-discuss natin sa part 2 natin, the different types or the different aspects of reliability and validity for our procedures and instruments. And lastly, you will learn about problems caused by extraneous variables and confounding variables. So, i-discuss ko dyan yung kung ano ba ibig sabihin ng extraneous variable, ano ba ibig sabihin ng confounder. Although mamaya medyo bibigyan ko na kayo ng konting overview about extraneous tsaka confounding. But yung in detail na discussion sa part 2 ko yun isasama. Okay, and of course, ano ba yung mga possible problems na pwedeng may contribute na itong mga extraneous variables na to and confounding variables, especially kapag hindi nyo na-control yung experiment ninyo. So, actually, ang tawag nga natin dito is yung mga classical or classic threats to internal validity. So dyan natin i-discuss yan sa part 2, yung mga classic threats to internal validity. Okay, now to briefly review you about experiments, balikan natin yung important features ng isang experiment para ma-ensure natin na makakapag-infer tayo ng cause and effect relationship between our variables or para ma-ensure natin na merong mataas na internal validity yung study natin. So the first one, if you can remember, di ba, you need to have means or ways to manipulate your antecedent conditions. Okay, so the first one is again, manipulate the antecedent conditions and you need to create at least 2 different treatment conditions. Okay, so bakit nga ulit 2 ang ating treatment conditions? Kasi again, we need another group as a point of comparison para makita natin kung meron ba talaga naging changes dun sa values ng dependent variable na ino-observe or mini-measure natin sa subjects natin. Kumbaga parang meron tayong baseline. Kaya kailangan natin ng at least 2 treatment conditions in an experiment. Okay? And then, dyan natin kasi makikita if as we change the values of the independent variable, meron din bang nangyayaring changes sa dependent variable natin. Kaya dapat at least 2 different treatment conditions. And then afterwards, kung meron na kayong means or ways to manipulate the IV and meron kayong at least 2 treatment conditions, the next thing that you will do is you need to recruit your subjects using various or different sampling techniques na diniscuss ko last time. So if you want to increase the external validity of your experiment or yung degree of confidence natin to infer or to generalize the result of the experiment, gumamit kayo ng probability sampling or the random sampling techniques like simple random, cluster, you have stratified. So kapag yun ang ginamit ninyo, tataas yung external validity or yung generalizability ng results ng study ninyo. But you can also use the non-probability sampling in experiment. And kapag nandun na tayo sa discussion ng mga different designs, mapapansin niyo na rarely achieve kasi yung paggamit ng probability sampling in experiments. Kasi medyo costly kasi kapag nag-probability sampling kayo. So titingnan natin yan sa mga susunod pa nating topics. So again, but you can use any of the sampling technique. Kung gusto niyo lang naman ma-increase yung external validity, you use random sampling. But again, the focus of experiments is establishing internal validity. Kaya minsan kahit hindi tayo mag-probability sampling, okay lang. Kasi again, mas priority natin yung internal validity, yung pag-infer ng cause and effect kaysa yung pag-generalize ng result. And then after you makapag-recruit ng subjects, of course, you will randomly assign your subjects to the different treatment conditions in your experiment. So ito yung pinaka-essential talaga na feature ng experiment. Aside from the manipulation, kailangan randomly assigned yung subjects ninyo. Okay, kasi kapag hindi nyo inassign randomly yung mga subjects ninyo in the different treatment conditions of your experiment, baka magkaroon halimbawa ng systematic difference yung mga subjects ninyo in terms of subject variables or subject characteristics. So halimbawa, ang topic ninyo is about the effects of, for example, the effects of lighting na lang, bright tsaka dim lighting sa test performance. And then, nag-recruit na kayo ngayon ng subjects. And then, ang ginawa ninyo is, sige, lahat na lang ng lalaki sa dim dimly lit room, tapos lahat ng babae sa bright room. Okay? So ang pwedeng mangyari diyan, hindi tayo confident kung yung brightness ba talaga yung may effect sa test performance. Kasi in that particular example, magkaiba rin yung setup nung sex for the subjects. May systematic difference din kaagad in terms of sex. Kung hindi naman part ng study ninyo na i-determine kung merong impact yung sex with the test performance, so dapat hindi nyo pag-ibahin or hindi nyo ihiwalay by sex yung subjects ninyo. Kailangan randomly assigned. Dapat sa group 1, dun sa dimly lit room, may male and may female. Sa kabila, ganun din, may male and female. Kasi kapag halimbawa, pinaghiwalay mo yung male and female, uh, diyan napapasok yung tinatawag nating confounding. So sige, discuss ko briefly kung ano yung confounding. Ang confounding is nangyayari siya kapag yung mga extraneous variables ninyo is nagkaroon ng impact sa experiment ninyo, specifically sa dependent variable. So sa case na yon, dahil nga hindi sila nag-random assignment, pinaghiwalay talaga nila yung male and female. So ang sex is an extraneous variable. Pero dahil hindi na control yung extraneous variable, magiging confounding or confounding variable siya. Magiging confounder siya ngayon. Ibig sabihin ng confounder, it is an extraneous variable na merong naging impact sa dependent variable ninyo. Yun yung confounding na tinatawag. Nakukuha niyo yun, class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung nakukuha ninyo. Nakuha yun? Okay. So again, you need to control. So ito na yung last feature na experiment. You need to control for the other factors na pwedeng mag-threaten sa internal validity ng experiment ninyo or pwedeng mag-threaten sa pag-infer nyo ng cause and effect relationship. So sa example natin kanina, so dahil nga ang study ninyo is about brightness tsaka test performance, so you need to control for other factors na hindi naman brightness at tsaka test performance. So halimbawa, yung sex ng subjects ninyo. So hindi pwede na puro male sa dimly lit room, puro female sa bright room. Kasi again, magiging confounder na ngayon yung sex. Hindi na lang siya extraneous variable. So ang extraneous variable, ito yung mga variables na hindi naman part ng study ninyo. Okay, katulad dun sa example ko, ang gusto lang naman nating malaman na may relationship or cause and effect relationship is brightness and test performance. So hindi naman kasama yung sex sa variable. Extraneous yun. So kailangan yung kontrolin yun. Kasi pag hindi nyo kinontrol yun, kapag may nakita kayong difference between the scores ng dalawang group, hindi tayo confident kung because or hindi tayo confident if that is because of the difference between the two treatment condition, 'di ba? Baka naman dahil dun sa extraneous variable na hindi niyo na control at naging confounder na siya or confounding variable. So again, the confounding variable is an extraneous variable na nagkaroon ng effect or nagkaroon ng impact sa dependent variable ninyo or in the whole experiment. Malakas sumira ng experiment ang mga extraneous variables na hindi nakokontrol. Okay? Malinaw ba yun, class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung malinaw yan. Ayan. So again, we will deal with confounders and extraneous variables dun sa part 2 natin. So again, kailangan lahat to ma-meet ninyo. Okay? Para tumaas yung internal validity ng experiment ninyo. Okay? Para confident tayo na yung independent variable lang talaga yung nagkakaroon ng effect with the dependent variable, not other factors na hindi naman included sa study ninyo. Okay? And then afterwards, kapag nagawa nyo na to lahat, so you can run the experiment and then collect the data from the subjects and then afterwards, compare the groups using statistics. Okay? And then kung merong difference between the groups, so pwede kayo ngayong mag-infer ng causation. Again, basta all these features are met. Kailangan satisfied lahat ng features na to. Kapag hindi kayo nag-control ng extraneous variables ninyo, kahit meron kayong manipulation, meron kayong random assignment, mahirap pong mag-infer ng causation. Okay? Kasi baka yung mga extraneous variables na yun, yung possibly may impact sa dependent variable na yun, hindi yung independent variable. So you need to satisfy all these features for an experiment. Okay? Ayan. So now let's have the basic components of an experiment. So aside from the features of a psychology experiment, syempre meron din tayong yung talagang basic component ng isang experiment. So sa mga next slides ko, ito yung mga nabanggit ko ng mga terminologies. Pero again, hindi ko pa siya formally na i-introduce sa inyo using my slides. So let's start with the first one, the first component na kailangan ninyo is, of course, you need to have an independent variable in your study, or the antecedent condition na tinatawag natin. And as you all know, the antecedent condition or the independent variable is the variable that the experimenter intentionally manipulates. Or another definition would be, this is the variable that the experimenter chooses to vary. Okay, so take note of that phrase, experimenter chooses to vary. Because in experimental research, as an experimenter or researcher, it is our responsibility kung ano yung mga conditions na isiset natin para i-represent or i-reflect yung independent variable natin. Okay? Kaya siya, kaya nandun yung term na, yung phrase na experimenter chooses to vary. Tayo yung pipili kung ano yung treatment conditions na ilalagay natin para i-reflect yung ating independent variable. Now, bakit siya tinawag na independent? Kasi meron tayong term na independent, di ba? So, independent siya because yung values ng IV natin, as an experimenter, tayo yung gumagawa ng values. And at the same time, the independent variable is not affected by anything else that happens in a particular experiment. Walang pwedeng maka-apekto sa independent variable natin. Okay, so again, kaya siya independent because we created the conditions as an experimenter, and at the same time, it is not affected by anything else in the experiment or anything else that happens in the experiment. Okay? Kaya siya tinawag na independent variable. Kasi nga in experiment, kasi dapat siya yung mayroong effect, hindi siya yung affected. Okay? Siya dapat yung magkakaroon ng effect doon sa another variable natin, which is the dependent variable. Okay? Nakukuha niyo yun, class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung nakukuha ninyo. Ayan. Okay. So now, ano ba yung mga possible examples na pwede nyong gamitin as an independent variable? So, sana makakuha kayo dito ng konting idea kung ano yung mga ipopropose ninyong topic kung wala pa kayong maisip. Okay? So these are some examples na pwede nyong gamitin as independent variable in your proposed experimental research. So first, you can use physical environment as your independent variable. So yung mga nabanggit ko last time, you can use lighting, di ba? Sa lighting, di ba? It can be dim or bright, diba? Dark or bright. It can also be noise level, pwedeng loud or soft noise, pwede ring different background noise like yung mga music, diba? Even temperature can also be an independent variable. Yeah, warm or cold, diba? Even the color of the room can be an independent variable. So, another one, it can also be task. Pwede rin kayong mag-propose ng mga independent variable wherein meron kayong ipapagawang task sa mga subjects ninyo. So, pwedeng varying level ng difficulty ng task sa different groups. So, halimbawa, meron kayong easy task na ipapagawa sa group 1 and then moderate difficulty sa group 2 and then group 3, merong difficult task na ipapagawa and you will check kung meron bang effect yung task difficulty halimbawa sa concentration or attention, pwede yung ganon. Another one, part pa rin ng task is meaningfulness. So halimbawa, meron kayong condition wherein you will ask the subjects to read nonsense syllables and then the other group would be reading real words. Diba? So nonsense syllables tsaka real words. And then you will think of a dependent variable na pwedeng possibly magkakaroon ng effect yung dalawang condition na nabanggit ko kanina. So pwede rin yan. It can also be psychological state. Diba? Although yung mga psychological state natin, pwede nating i-measure, diba, kapag correlational design. But in experiment, pwede natin yang i-manipulate. Pwede natin i-set up yan. Later on, meron ako ipapakita ng example wherein anxiety yung kanilang psychological state. So pwede kayong halimbawa mag-produce ng anxiety sa inyong mga subjects. So meron kayong gagawing mga setup wherein tataas yung anxiety level nila or bababa yung anxiety level nila. Tapos titingnan ninyo kung meron bang effect yon on a particular dependent variable. Happiness, pwede rin yan. Mag-i-induce kayo ng happiness. Halimbawa, may papanood kayong mga, kunyari, film para magiging happy sila, di ba? Or film na magiging malungkot sila, tapos i-compare nyo yung dalawang condition na yon in terms of a dependent variable na ipopropose ninyo. Can also be about feelings of success or failure. It depends sa inyo, sa researcher, kung ano yung maiisip ninyong psychological state. But always ensure, class, kapag may naisip kayong psychological state na gusto ninyong i-try, i-manipulate in your experiment, lagi kayong titingin muna ng literature bago kayo magsulat ng inyong mga, or mag-propose ng mga topics na ganyan, or mga variable na ganyan. Find literature first. Okay. And then, it can also be sets of instructions. Pwede rin kayong gumamit ng sets of instructions as independent variable. O halimbawa, merong group, o kaya group 1 will be paying attention to a red circle. Tingnan mo lang yung red circle. Tapos, meron kayong particular test na ipapagawa sa kanila para ma-measure yung dependent variable. Tapos yung isang group, blue circle, and then you will compare yung dependent variable to those two different treatment condition. And then merong ibang study na babasa ko, merong mga pinapa-view na photographs. So halimbawa, may ipapakita kayong photographs ng mga tao, tapos kunyari ang independent variable ninyo is perceived intelligence. Diba? Kapag ba medyo gopings yung itsura ng picture, mukha bang matalino, diba? Merong mga ganong experiment na nabasa ko before. Wherein, ang instruction is to view pictures and then i-rate mo kung gaano siya katalino, di ba? Yung perceived intelligence dun sa picture na yun. so pwede rin yung mga ganon. And then of course, in clinical psychology or in the clinical field, karamihan ng mga independent variable is intervention. Yan. For example, you want to test the efficacy of, for example, hypnotherapy, and then ang iyong dependent variable is anxiety. So, kaya cognitive behavioral therapy. Napakadaming interventions na pwedeng gamitin. Now, ang tip ko lang sa inyo, class, if hindi pa rin kayo nakakaisip ng topic, isipin niyo yung particular experiment na feasible siyang gawin, halimbawa naka face-to-face tayo. Kasi in yung mga previous years na nasa CVSU pa, naka face-to-face pa, kinoconduct kasi namin yung experiments. That's why kapag nagpapagawa ako ng research proposal ngayong online, i-visualize Isipin niyo na pwede siyang gawin kung nasa CVSU tayo ngayon. So yun yung mga i-propose ninyong topic. And then, please avoid yung mga interventions kasi sa interventions medyo mahihirapan tayo dyan. Lalo kapag meron kasing mga nagpo-propose ngayon na mga telehealth, online intervention, medyo mahihirapan kasi tayo dyan mag-control ng mga extraneous variables. Kaya hindi ko rin siya medyo tinatanggap. Yung mga interventions natin. Tsaka kailangan nyo ng professional dyan. Kasi since mga students pa lang kayo, hindi kayo pwede mag-administer ng mga intervention. So, more likely to kayo magpo-focus sa mga to. Or kung makakaisip man kayo ng ibang independent variable kesa dito sa interventions. Okay? So, ayun yung mga examples ng mga independent variables na pwede nyong i-include sa experiment ninyo. And again, in our field, napakadami. Diba? Endless yung possible independent variable na pwede ninyong gamitin. Diba? Pagalingan na lang tayo maghanap ng literature. Yun talaga ang labanan dyan. Pagalingan maghanap ng literature, diba? About that particular variable na gagamitin ninyo. Okay? So kung meron na kayong naisip na independent variable, again, the next thing that you will do is to check literatures if meron bang mga studies na related with your chosen independent variable. Diba? Now, by the way, do you have questions so far about the examples of independent variable? Press 0 kung wala, press 1 kung meron kayong question. Nandiyan pa ba kayo, class? Ayan. Okay. So now, kung babalikan natin yung features kanina ng experiment, nabanggit ko doon na again, you need to have at least two different treatment conditions. Now, para ma-satisfy natin yung feature na yon ng experiment, always remember that as an experimenter or researcher, you must give your IV at least 2 possible values. So kailangan meron 2 possible values yung IV ninyo. Kayo bahala kung ano yung isa-set ninyong values for the IV. Now, ang tawag natin doon sa values ng IV is the levels of the independent variable. So again, the levels of the independent variable is the two or more values of your independent variable manipulated by the experimenter. Okay, so again, ang levels, synonymous yan with the treatment conditions. Naalala nyo sa chapter 1 natin, di ba, meron tayong antecedent condition. The antecedent condition is the independent variable. Yung main term natin dun sa independent variable. Yung treatment conditions, yung specific sets of antecedents, levels yung tawag natin doon. Okay, in experiment, the levels of the independent variable. So again, levels is synonymous with the treatment conditions. Antecedent is synonymous with the independent variable. Okay? So kung halimbawa, kung meron kayong 3 levels ng IV na sinet in your experiment, so dapat meron kayong 3 treatment conditions during the experiment. Okay? So magbigay tayo ng example from our previous lesson. Okay, nakikita na ba yung whiteboard? Ayan. So naalala nyo sa previous lesson natin, wherein meron akong example doon na tinest natin, or we want to test the effect of lighting sa problem solving ability. Diba? And then yung lighting, meron tayong 2 conditions. We have the well-lit room and the dimly lit room. Ayan. So this is your IV, yung general variable na minamanipulate ninyo. Etong dalawa, ito yung levels of IV. So in this case, meron tayong, again, at least 2, di ba? So meron tayong 2 levels of IV. Pag nag-include pa ako ng isa, halimbawa, dark room, madilim, kasi walang ilaw. So meron na kayo ngayon 3 levels of IV. Okay? So again, IV is synonymous with antecedent or the antecedents. And then this one, yung levels, synonymous siya with treatment conditions. Ayan. Nakukuha to class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung nakukuha ninyo. Ayan. So in an experiment, pwede kayong magdagdag ng levels ninyo. Depende kung ano yung choice ninyo as a researcher. So pwede kayong merong isang IV with at least 2 levels. Pwede rin kayong mag-propose kung talagang malakas-lakas ang loob ninyo, di ba? 2 IV. And then each IV has at least 2 levels. So yung first IV ninyo, merong at least 2 levels. And then yung second IV ninyo, merong at least 2 levels din. Pwede rin yung ganito, which is the factorial design naman kapag dalawa na yung, or 2 or more na yung independent variable ninyo. But i-discuss pa natin yan sa lesson, lesson 10, yung factorial design. So pwede kayo mag-propose ng 2 IVs kung gusto niyo, pero kung gusto niyo ay basic experiment lang, 1 IV with at least 2 levels lang. Okay, kasi kapag 2 IVs na, kailangan nyo ng tig 2 levels for each IV. At least 2 for each IV. Although pwede yan. Pwede kayo mag-propose ng ganyan. Okay? Ayan. Malinaw ba class yung levels of the independent variable? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung malinaw. Ayan. So again, huwag kayong mako-confuse with the IV and the levels of IV. Tandaan niyo lang kapag yung IV, yun yung general variable or general term for the variable that you will manipulate. The levels of IV, yun yung mga treatment conditions na isiset ninyo para makita kung meron bang changes sa dependent variable. Okay? Ayan. And again, if you have 1 IV, you can add more levels depending on your decision as a researcher kung ilang levels yung idadagdag niyo. Pero ang pinaka-basic, yun nga, 1 IV with 2 levels. Yun yung pinaka-basic na experiment. Okay? Now, paano naman natin malalaman ngayon kung kapag nag-vary yung levels ng IV, nagkakaroon siya ng effect sa particular behavior na gusto nating i-observe. Siyempre, kailangan natin ngayon ng isa pang variable na i-measure natin from the subjects, which is the dependent variable naman. So, again, the dependent variable is the variable that is being measured or observed by the researcher or by the experimenter. So dito natin malalaman sa dependent variable kung nagkaroon ba ng effect yung variation ng levels ng IV natin. So dahil nga merong different levels ng IV, we are expecting na dapat sa dependent variable, meron ding variation doon sa magiging observation natin or scores na makukuha natin from the subjects. Okay? So DV is, again, the behavior being observed or measured, or pwede rin natin tawagin to na ito yung outcome na we are trying to explain in the experiment using the independent variable na pinropose natin. Okay, so again, if we vary the values or levels of the independent variable, we are expecting na meron din dapat changes or variation sa values ng DV natin. Especially kung merong true effect or meron talagang effect ang inyong IV sa DV. So dahil nga meron tayong different levels, we are expecting na meron din different scores na makukuha from those different levels ng independent variable. Okay? And by the way, the dependent variable is also called the dependent measure or dependent measures. So dependent siya in a sense na, again, yung value niya, yung value ng dependent variable kasi natin, we assume na nakadepende yung value niyan from the independent variable. Kaya siya tinawag na dependent variable. From the term itself, dependent. So, naka-anchor yung scores niyan or yung observations natin sa dependent variable sa independent variable. Okay? So again, dependent in a sense that its values are assumed to depend on the values of the independent variable. So kung merong nagbabago sa independent variable at alam natin na merong magiging effect yung independent variable, we are expecting na meron ding magbabago sa dependent variable natin. Okay? Nakukuha yan, class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung nakukuha ninyo. Ayan. So these are the other terms na pwede nyong gamitin to describe your independent and dependent variable. Sometimes makakarinig kayo ng treatments, manipulations, interventions, and conditions. But isa lang ang dinedescribe niyan, the independent variable. So pag tinanong ko kayo, anong treatment ninyo? O, babanggitin niyo sa akin yung independent variable. O, what are your manipulations? Diba? So babanggitin niyo halimbawa yung different treatment conditions na sinet up ninyo in your experiment. Intervention, what is your intervention? The independent variable lang yung pinapertain ko dyan. It can also be cause. Diba? What is your cause? Diba? Independent variable din yun. Kasi ang effect, the dependent variable. Okay? So sa dependent variable naman, it can also be referred as measures, effects, outcomes, or results. So ito yung mga other terms natin in describing the IVs and DVs. Okay? Now, let's practice on how to determine the IV, the levels of IV and the DV. So yung mga next slides ko dito, I want you to identify what is the independent variable. Sa chat box na lang tayo ha, and I want everyone na mag-participate sana para naman mapapractice kayo. I want you to identify the independent variable. I want you to count how many levels yung included doon sa particular study na ipapakita ko. Enumerate the levels of the IV. So bibilangin niyo tapos i-enumerate niyo kung ano yung mga levels. At the same time, i-identify niyo rin yung dependent variable na mini-measure doon sa particular study niyo. Okay, repeat ko lang ha. Identify the IV. Kapag isa lang, i-identify niyo kagad kung ano yung name ng independent variable. Bilangin niyo kung ilan yung levels. And then enumerate nyo kung ano yung levels na yon. And then the last one, identify the dependent variable. Okay, ready na? Let's start. The first example. A study of the effects of color on easing anxiety compared anxiety test scores of participants or subjects who completed the test printed on yellow paper, green paper, cerulean paper, and white paper. So they want to test the effects of colors or color in easing anxiety. And they compared the anxiety test scores of the subjects who completed the test printed in yellow paper, green, cerulean, and white paper. So the IV, wow, bibilis oh. The IV is color. But You need to be specific kapag ganyan. Ha? Dapat color of the papers. Ayan, color of the papers. Kasi pag color lang, pwede kasi baka color ng room, di ba? Color ng table, color ng chairs. So, specify ninyo. So, color of papers. Okay? And then, how many levels do we have here? Taray, ang bibilis. So we have 4 levels. Namely, ano-ano yung mga levels na yon? What are the different levels? So yellow paper, green paper, the cerulean paper, and the white paper. That's correct. And then, what is the dependent variable in this particular example? Dependent variable. Cherry, medyo kulang. Test score saan? Okay. Anxiety scores or in general na lang, anxiety. Pwede ng anxiety. Okay, pwede na 'yon. Kahit anxiety lang. Kasi ilalagay nyo naman yan sa definition kung anong particular measurement yung gagamitin nyo for anxiety. So, anxiety test scores yan. So, pwedeng anxiety na lang. Okay? Very good. Next, this one. A group of researchers conducted a study that will determine the effects of background noise in class performance. Students in one classroom worked on a mathematical task with calming music. Students in the second room heard aggressive, exciting music, and students in the last room had no music at all. What is your independent variable? Okay, very good. We have background noise. How many levels of IV meron dito? So we have 3. O baka malito yung iba, bagawing 4. Magkasama yung aggressive, exciting ha. So ano naman yung mga levels natin? Enumerate the levels. Sige. Enumerate nyo yung levels natin. Levels of IV. So kung merong 3, ayan. We have the calming music. Kulang yung sa'yo, Ayla. Dapat merong aggressive din dyan. Aggressive, exciting, magkasama yan. Aggressive, exciting music. And of course, the no music room. And the dependent variable is class performance. And ano yung way natin to measure the class performance? We have the mathematical task. Ito yung pang-measure natin. Okay, very good. Next. Childhood participation in sports, cultural groups, and youth groups is to be related to improve self-esteem for adolescents. In a representative study, a researcher compares scores on a standardized self-esteem questionnaire for a sample of 100 adolescents with a history of group participation and separate sample of 100 who have no history of group participation. What is the IV? The levels of the IV and the dependent variable. Sige, tingnan natin. Kanina ano to eh. Kanina nalito dito yung 3-2 eh. Tingnan natin ang 3-1. See? Kahit kayo nalito rin, no? Ayan. Sige, tanungin ko muna kayo, what is your dependent variable? Dependent muna, dependent. Okay, that's correct. We have self-esteem. Now, what is your independent variable? Independent. I-reveal na natin yung sagot dito. Basahin nyo ulit yung example and then you check if this is an experiment. Tingnan niyo kung experiment yan. Childhood participation in sports, cultural groups, and youth groups is to be related to improve self-esteem for adolescents. In a representative study, a researcher compares scores on a standardized self-esteem questionnaire for a sample of 100 adolescents with a history of group participation and 100 adolescents, a separate sample of 100 adolescents who have no history of group participation. Sige. Meron ba tayong independent variable? May na-manipulate ba tayo dito? Ano class? Meron ba? May manipulate ba tayo? Wala tayong manipulate dito. So basically, this is an example of an ex-post facto study. Quasi-experiment to. Wala tayong manipulation ng IV. Kasi again, kumuha lang tayo ng 100 samples na may history ng group participation, tapos 100 samples na walang history ng group participation. Tapos binigyan lang natin ng questionnaire. So compare. Ex-post facto yan. From the word history, pre-existing na yung characteristic, yung subject variable. Ex-post facto to. So basically, this is not an experimental research. So hindi natin kailangan i-identify dyan yung IV. Okay? Quasi-IV, tawag natin doon sa group participation. Magiging quasi-IV siya. Okay? So bakit ko in-include to dito? Kasi sa midterm exam ninyo, madaming ganyan. Okay? Na mag-identify kayo ng design ng inyong anong mga bibigay ko example sa midterm exam. Although multiple choice naman siya. Okay, next. This one, a researcher investigated different combinations of temperature and humidity to examine how heat affects math performance. The researcher compared 3 temperature conditions. We have 10 degrees Celsius, 30 degrees Celsius, and 50 degrees Celsius with a high humidity and a low humidity condition for each temperature. What is the independent variable or are the independent variables? Okay, so meron tayong dalawang independent variable dito, temperature and humidity. How many levels meron sa temperature? Sa temperature lang muna, ilang levels meron sa temperature? So we have 3 levels. How about for humidity? Okay, we have 2. So this is a 3 by 2 factorial design. So factorial design yung tawag natin dyan kapag more than one independent variable. And of course, the dependent variable. What is the dependent variable? We have, andyan na yun, tinan niya. We have the math performance. Okay, very good. Okay, how about this example? Suppose this is your hypothesis. So ito medyo medyo matrabaho na to i-identify kasi dito hypothesis na inilagay ko. Hindi na ako nagbanggit ng independent variable, ng dependent variable, hypothesis kagad. People learn words faster when the words are written horizontally than they are written vertically. So my question here is, what is your independent variable? Ano kayang pwede nating ipangalan sa independent variable natin? So people learn words faster when the words are written horizontally than they are written vertically. Ano kaya? So yung words daw ay naka-horizontal or naka-vertical. And titingnan natin kung saan mas mabilis matututo ng words, di ba? Writing style, pwedeng writing style, alignment of words can be. Writing technique, way of writing. Napakadami natin pwede natin gamitin But pwede rin siguro kahit ano na lang, word orientation, di ba? The word orientation. So pwede 'yan, pero pwede rin naman yung sinabi ninyo. So word orientation, sige, gamitin natin yung word orientation. Now, how many levels of IV meron dito sa example natin? Okay, we have 2. Namely, we have horizontal orientation and the vertical orientation. Ayan. So ano ba itsura niyan kapag halimbawa nakasulat siya sa papel? So pakita natin. Where's my whiteboard? Ayan. So syempre kapag horizontal, tandaan nyo lang yung letter H, pahiga. Okay, so halimbawa, ito yung horizontal orientation ng word. Experiment. Horizontal yan kasi pahiga siya. And then, pag vertical, tandaan nyo lang yung letter V, pababa. Pababa. Ayan. Experiment. So, ganyan yan, yung example dyan. O baka may diagonal pa, kung gusto nyo mag-include ng another level. Diba? Ayun yung word orientation. Now, what is our dependent variable? Ano kaya yung dependent variable natin dito? Ano kaya pwedeng gamiting term for the dependent variable? Anyone? Reading comprehension. Okay. Pwedeng reading comprehension. But ang tinitingnan lang natin dito is how fast you learn words. O, pwede rin namang retention. How about we name it rate of learning, di ba? The rate of learning. So para mas alam natin na talagang titingnan natin kung gaano kabilis, di ba? Pwedeng rate of learning. So basically, ang tinitingnan natin dito is the effects or the effect of word orientation on learning or rate of learning. Or pwede rin natin i-state na ganito yung hypothesis, na yung rate of learning is dependent on the word orientation. Diba? Nakadepende yung rate of learning natin sa orientation ng words. Or kung gagawin na natin ito sa research paper, na null hypothesis na siya, we can state it as word orientation does not significantly affect the rate of learning. Or word orientation has no significant effect on the rate of learning. Okay? So yun yung pwedeng hypothesis na pwedeng gawin natin dito. Okay, do you have questions so far about identifying the IVs, levels of IVs and DVs? Question? Press 0 kung wala, press 1 kung. Okay, malinaw naman siya. Thank you. Ayan. So by now, you're well equipped now with, of course, the knowledge on how to determine the IVs, the DVs, and of course, the level of IVs in a particular experimental research. Now, another important thing that you need to know is, especially about your variables, is paano ba natin dinedefine yung mga variables natin in a particular experimental research or in the context of an experiment. So far kasi, yung discussion natin ng mga variables natin is more on their conceptual notions or conceptual definition. Diba? More on conceptual definition lang yung mga alam natin about our variables. So halimbawa, sa IVs natin, brightness. Diba? Iba-iba yung conceptual definition ng brightness depending on the literature na kukunin ninyo or theory na gagamitin ninyo. Diba? Brightness can be quality or pwede ring state of giving out or reflecting light. Diba? Brightness yun. But another definition would be brightness is about quality of being intelligent. Diba? So iba-iba yung conceptual definition ng brightness. Even rate of learning. Diba? Baka ang definition ng rate of learning is how fast you learn words or how many words can you remember. Diba? So depende sa makukuha ninyong literature or depende sa inyo researcher kung paano niyo siya i-define, di ba? So, yun nga lang class, hindi kasi sufficient kapag conceptual definition lang yung ilalagay natin in a particular research or experiment. Kasi again, conceptual definition is merely you are just describing your variable. Parang ang question dyan would be, what is the meaning of your variable? Halimbawa, what is brightness? Tingnan niyo sa mga possibly dictionary, what is brightness? Or sa mga references natin, sa mga books natin in psychology, what is brightness? Diba? Yun yung conceptual definition. But again, it is not sufficient na conceptual definition lang yung gagamitin niyo in your study. Kasi always remember class, in scientific researches, diba? One criteria na kailangan din nating masatisfy, especially sa characteristics ng modern science, sa chapter 1 natin, is kailangan replicable yung ating study or tinatawag nating replication. Dapat ma-replicate natin yung study. So kung conceptual definition lang yung i-include ninyo, mahihirapan yung ibang researcher na i-replicate yung study ninyo. Okay? So para ma-replicate yung isang study, again, hindi sapat lang na conceptual definition lang yung indicated sa variables ninyo. Kasi again, conceptual definition pertains to what exactly is your variable about. Diba? What is the variable being measured? What is the variable being manipulated? Yun lang yun, conceptual definition. From references lang kukunin ninyo yung mga definition. May citation lagi. Okay? So in research or in experiment, para ma-replicate ng other researchers ang inyong mga procedures, you need to have an operational definition. Okay, so sorry wala akong nilagay na slide for the conceptual definition. So again, ulitin ko lang yung definition ng conceptual definition. Okay, it is, the conceptual definition is about what is being measured or what is being manipulated. Kung yan ay sa experiment. Kumbaga, yun yung mga definition na nakukuha ninyo from literatures, possibly from dictionaries, from reference books. Yun yung conceptual definition. But operational definition is mas important to in experiment. Kasi in operational definition, dito nyo makikita yung specification ng precise meaning ng variables ninyo in the context of your experiment. Ibig sabihin, paano nyo dinedefine yung variables ninyo in the context of your experiment. Specifically, ano yung procedures na ginawa ninyo to manipulate your IV and to measure your DV. That is operational definition. Okay, again, operational definition is the specification of the precise meaning of your variables within your experiment. Nakalagay dyan kung ano yung ways or means nyo to manipulate the IV and ano yung ways or means ninyo to measure your DV. Okay, from the word operations tayo. Operations means an active process. So ibig sabihin, dapat naka-include sa operational definition yung process or active process na ginawa nyo as an experimenter kung paano nyo manipulate yung IV ninyo at paano nyo mineasure yung DV. Okay? So for example, dun sa kaninang research wherein gusto nilang malaman yung effect ng color of paper doon sa performance. So yung independent variable niyo doon is kunyari ba color na lang. Sige, gawin natin color. I-define niyo yon using definitions from books, di ba? Or from dictionary. Pero avoid using dictionary kasi marami naman tayo mga references wherein we can acquire the definition of color. Now, the operational definition of color is binanggit doon, nagagamit kayo ng yellow paper, green paper, white paper, and cerulean paper. So doon yung ipiprint yung halimbawa yung test na i-administer sa kanila. Yun yung operational definition niya. The yellow paper, the green paper, white paper, and cerulean paper wherein the test materials will be printed. Yun yung operational definition nun. But for scientific purposes, you need to be more specific and precise, especially in the designation of colors. Kasi alam natin na ang colors, 'di ba? Iba-iba ang shades niyan. Iba-iba yung hue ng color, 'di ba? Yellow, green, iba-iba ang shades ng green, iba-iba yung shade ng yellow, iba-iba yung shades ng blue. 'Di ba? Iba-iba yung tone din ng mga colors na 'yan. So sa experiment niyo, you need to specify anong klaseng blue, 'di ba? Anong klaseng green? Yung gagamitin ninyo. So inilalagay yan sa operational definition. Same goes with brightness. So sa mga example ko last time, napapansin niyo, binabanggit ko lang dimly lit room, well lit room. Pero in reality, kapag nagsulat na kayo ng paper niyo, you need to specify and you need to be precise what does it mean to be bright or to be dim. Kapag ba bright as the sun, as the sunlight, ano ba klaseng brightness 'yan? Or baka naman pwede kayong gumamit ng instrument to measure brightness. So i-specify ninyo how bright or how dim. So for example, gamit tayo ng unit of measurement for brightness ng mga light, 'di ba? Lumen or the LM. So sa dim, halimbawa, gawin natin mga 100 lumens lang. Yung pala ibig sabihin ng dim, yung dimly lit room. Kailangan 100 lumens lang yung ilaw. Ganun ka-dim yung room na yon. So gagamit kayo possibly ng light meter or photometer, 'di ba? And then kapag bright, so halimbawa mga 1,000 halimbawa or 2,000 lumens. So dapat yan ang naka-include sa definition ninyo. Okay, so mamaya magbibigay naman ako ng example para makita ninyo. Okay? So itong mga binabanggit ko na specification ng precise meaning ng variable in the context of experiment, again, yan yung operational definition. Okay, so again, the conceptual is about what is being manipulated or observed. So yun yung mga definition na galing sa theories or literatures, yun yung conceptual. Kapag operational naman, so kung ang conceptual is what, so operational is how. How are you going to manipulate or observe your variables? Nagagets yun? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung nakukuha ninyo. Okay, nakukuha nyo class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung nakuha. Okay, again, kapag conceptual, what is being manipulated or observed or measured, nanggagaling yung mga conceptual definitions sa mga literatures, sa mga Pwedeng sa dictionary, pero again, avoid dictionary. Gamit na lang kayo ng ibang references. Although, again, pwede naman siya, pero again, avoid lang. Sayang naman yung mga inaral ninyo in our field, di ba? Kung di kayo gagamit ng mga reference materials natin. Ayan. And then, operational is about how you are going to manipulate your IV or how you are going to measure your DV. Okay? So basically, yung operational definition, yung magsasabi sa ibang researcher kung paano natin kinonduct or kinerry out yung experiment. Kumbaga parang mini procedures yung operational definition. Kasi in research paper, meron tayong specific section sa, halimbawa sa chapter 3, nandun yung full procedure of the experiment na pwede rin nilang gamitin as guide. Kung halimbawa, magko-conduct din sila ng another experimental study na the same topic nung ginawa natin. So pwede nilang tingnan yung procedure, pero kung mini procedure lang yung gusto nilang tingnan, operational definition. Okay? So yan yung way natin para ma-replicate natin yung isang study. Kailangan nasa operational definition yung ginawa nating pag-manipulate ng IV at pag-measure ng DV. So ito yung example ng conceptual definition. Halimbawa, background noise. So ito kinuha ko lang siya sa dictionary para lang maipakita sa inyo yung example. So background noise is a type of noise that is not the sound that you are specifically listening to or monitoring. And then always remember na kapag mag-i-include kayo ng conceptual definition sa chapter 1 ninyo in the definition of terms. So binigyan ko na kayo ng sample research paper ha. Merong definition of terms doon kasi ang nilalagay doon conceptual and operational. So pag conceptual, laging may citation. So kung may author, edi surnames, author's surname dito sa part na to. And then in this one, kung meron namang date of publication, lagyan nyo ng date of publication. Kung wala, edi ND. Ito yung example ng conceptual. Pero pag ginawa ko tong operational, okay, ganito yung mangyayari dyan. So sabi ko sa inyo, paano ko i-manipulate yung background noise? Background noise pertains to the different sounds that were arranged in the three separate rooms in the conduct of the experiment, including calming music. You can also include the title of the music para mas precise talaga siya. Aggressive, exciting music, and no music. Okay. Nakukuha niyo yung difference ng dalawa, class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung nakukuha ninyo. Nakukuha niyo yung difference ng dalawa? Ayan. Okay, another example. So in this one naman, this is a study conducted by Schachter in 1959 about the effect of anxiety on affiliation. So in this study, nag-conduct sila ng experiment to test whether anxious individual will want to be with others. So kapag mas anxious tayo, mas gusto natin na may kasama tayong tao. Yun yung gusto nila i-test dito. So basically, yung anxiety dito is a psychological state na minanipulate nila. Diba? Although pwede naman natin itong gawing correlational design, i-measure na lang natin pareho. Pero dito again, meron silang means to manipulate the anxiety. So ang ginawa nila in the experiment, dinala nila yung mga subjects into a room with an experimenter na naka-lab gown, wearing white coat, lab coat, and naka-horn rim glasses. If you're wondering ano yung horn rim glasses, ganito yung itsura niya. Sige nga, drawing ko. Parang ganito yung shape nun eh. Parang pa ganyan. Hindi lang pantay. Basta ganyan yung horn rim glasses. Drawberries eh, no? Ayan. And then, naka-lab coat siya na white, naka-horn rim glasses. And inintroduce niya yung sarili niya as Dr. Greffer Zilstein. So pwedeng ano lang yan, pseudonym na lang yan. Under the Department of Neurology and Psychiatry. And of course, inexplain nung experimenter na the study is about the effects of electric shock. So basically, gumamit sila ng deception dito. Hindi nila binanggit na yung study pala is about anxiety on affiliation. Sinabi lang nila the effects of electric shock. And then, in-split nila yung subjects into two groups. So the first group, or the group 1, they were shown some elaborate electrical equipment. And they are led to expect painful shocks. So in-inform sila na makakaranas kayo ng painful shocks doon sa equipment na yon. So sabi nung experimenter, ayan, these shocks will hurt, they will be painful. As you can guess, if in research of this sort, we are to learn anything at all that will really help humanity, it is necessary that our shocks be intense. Okay? So bakit nila ginawa tong particular scripting na to? And yung pag-introduce ng electrical equipment, gusto nilang mag-induce ng high anxiety level. Okay? Yung isang group, ito lang naman yung sinabi nung researcher or experimenter. So the other group received instruction leading them to believe they would feel no pain. So magiging at ease na yung mga dito, yung mga subjects dito kasi hindi naman sila masasaktan di ba? So do not let the word shock trouble you. I am sure that you will enjoy this experiment. Sa kabila painful, dito naman you will enjoy. I assure you that what you feel will not in any way be painful. So dito ang ginagawa nila, minamanipulate nila na makaranas ng low anxiety or no anxiety or none, di ba? Walang anxiety na mararanasan yung mga subjects. Okay? So ngayon, tingnan natin yung operational and conceptual definition. So our independent variable is anxiety. Okay? So ganito class, sinusulat ang conceptual and operational definition in your definition of terms sa chapter 1. So the first one, ayan, naka-bold yung anxiety. And then you proceed with the conceptual definition na nanggaling halimbawa ito sa DSM-5. Kaya may citation ako ng APA. So the apprehensive anticipation of future danger or misfortune accompanied by a feeling of worry, distress, and or somatic symptoms. And then proceed with the citation. Okay? And then it will be followed by this statement. Don't forget this part. In this study, kasi tandaan niyo, ang operational definition is how you define your variables in your study. In this study or in this experimental research, it involves two conditions such as high anxiety condition and low anxiety condition. But as you can see, masyado pang vague itong dalawa, no? So pwede nyo pang i-specify yan like this one. High anxiety condition. So naka-indented yan. Kapag halimbawa sinulat ninyo sa chapter 1 sa definition of terms, parang ganito yan. Pakita ko sa inyo ha. So andito yung anxiety. Naglagay kayo ng conceptual na merong citation. Tapos operational. And then ganyan. Tapos indent nyo dito yung high anxiety condition. Tapos low anxiety condition. Tapos naka-italicize to. Tapos lagay nyo na dito agad yung operational definition na lang niya. So makikita nyo yan doon sa example ko na binigay sa research paper. Ayan. So ito yung example natin. Pakita ko ulit. So dito mas inelaborate ko and mas precise yung pagkaka-describe ng high anxiety condition. As you can see, it is defined by the electronic equipment set up in the room, the ominous behavior of Dr. Zilstein. Ano ba yung ominous behavior doon? Yung binanggit niya na, yung halimbawa, parang masyado siyang serious doon sa pagsasabi niya ng script, di ba? Na parang nakakatakot talaga yung may experience nila. And the explicit statement that the subjects should expect painful shocks. Di ba? Kita niyo precise and specific yung nilagay nila dito. Sa low anxiety condition, it is defined by the absence of equipment, Dr. Zilstein's more relaxed manner, and the explicit statement that the shocks would not be painful. So that is an example of the operational definition for the independent variable. So by the way, ang tawag natin dito kapag define natin operationally yung procedures kung paano minamanipulate yung IV, this is called the experimental operational definition. So again, yung pinakita kong example kanina, yung high anxiety condition and low anxiety condition na operational definition, experimental operational definition yan, wherein you will explain the meaning of the independent variable in the context of your experiment. You will define exactly the process of manipulating your treatment conditions. Yun yung experimental operational definition. And then of course, hindi lang IV yung i-define natin. Kailangan i-define nyo rin yung inyong DV, wherein you will include the measured operational definition. So in the measured operational definition, you will indicate exactly how you've measured or observed your dependent variable. Katulad nitong example natin dito. So yung affiliation, yun yung ating dependent variable. So sabi dyan, it refers to the act of connecting or associating with a person or organization. And then lagay nyo yung author's surname and then kailan na-publish yung reference na kinuha ninyo. And then proceed kayo with the operational definition. In this study, it is the mean score acquired from answering the affiliative tendency scale by, halimbawa, by Taoy 2019. So include niyo yung test names kapag gumamit kayo ng standardized test. So ito yung operational definition. Kapag may nakita na kayong term na in this study, yun na yung operational definition. O halimbawa, anxiety ulit. Pero ito naman, gagawin nating dependent variable. Example lang to ha. Kunyari, dependent variable yung anxiety ninyo. So, ginamit ko ulit yung definition from the APA. And then, followed by the operational definition. In this study, it is measured as a heartbeat in excess of 100 beats per minute following 5 minutes of rest on a sofa. So, ito yung ways, or ito yung means nila to measure anxiety in terms of heartbeat excess of 100 beats per minute following 5 minutes of rest in the sofa. Okay? And then, yan, last example, ito pa. So, ganun pa rin yung conceptual definition. I use the APA definition. And then, in this study, it is the mean score in the Beck Anxiety Inventory. So, pwede rin ganyan. Okay, so yung mga examples ko wherein you will measure the dependent variable using a standardized test. Again, you need to include the test names. Okay, hindi pwedeng nakalagay lang dyan, ganito. In this study, it is the mean score from the anxiety scale. Kailangan ilagay nyo rin yung test name. Kasi again, titingnan din yan ng mga other researcher kasi baka naghahanap din sila nung gagamitin nilang instrument to measure anxiety. Diba? So, nakita nila, Beck anxiety, sige, tingnan ko nga rin, baka magandang gamitin tong instrument na to. Again, the purpose of this one is for replication. Kaya kailangan ng operational definition. Okay? So, although meron tayong specific section sa research paper natin wherein ilalagay natin in detail yung test na gagamitin, halimbawa sa data to be gathered ng inyong research paper, doon nakalagay yung details ng test ninyo. In the operational definition, ilalagay nyo lang doon yung test name na ginamit ninyo. Sa procedures na siya, sa procedures na ng chapter 3 ilalagay yung full detail ng test. Halimbawa, ilang items, ano yung scoring procedure ng test, anong type ng scale, ano yung reliability and validity, sa ano na yun sa chapter 3. Sa chapter 1, sa definition of terms, ito lang. Yung name lang ng test. Okay? So again, always remember when you are writing the operational definition, please be precise and specific. So kung physical variables ang gagamitin niyo as halimbawa, as independent variable, specify nyo kung anong unit of measurement yung gagamitin ninyo. Katulad ng example ko kanina, yung independent variable is temperature, di ba? Pinakita ko na Celsius yung ginamit ko. Nilagay ko anong specific temperature, 10 degrees, 20, tsaka 50. Di ba? Para ma-specify natin yung sinasabi nating, kunyari, warm, cold, and hot. And then, kung halimbawa yung lighting na binigay ko na example kanina, bright and dark, what does it mean kung bright? Diba? What does it mean if it's dark or dim? Diba? We need to be objective. So dapat meron din tayong particular values na ilalagay kapag ganun. Diba? Kung temperature, you can use thermometer para ma-measure nyo yung temperature ng room. Kung halimbawa, temperature ng room yung independent variable ninyo. Kung sounds, loud versus soft, you can use tools to measure the loudness in terms of decibel. Diba? Okay, so again, the purpose of writing the operational definition as precise and as specific as possible is for replication. Okay, so this is also a tip na tinuturo ko na rin sa inyo na kapag nagsulat kayo ng chapter 3 sa procedures part ng experiment ninyo. So kung halimbawa, wala pa kayong idea kung paano nyo i-conduct yung experiment ninyo, paano nyo i-manipulate yung IV na ipopropose ninyo, so balikan ninyo yung mga literatures na nabasa ninyo about that particular independent variable or dependent variable. And i-check ninyo yung mga published articles na yon. Ano yung ginawa nilang procedure para ma-manipulate yung IV and DV? Para magkaroon din kayo ng idea kung paano nyo gagawin ngayon sa study ninyo. Diba? Kung meron silang operational definition doon at procedure, mare-replicate nyo ngayon. Okay? Nakukuha yan, class? Press 0 kung hindi, press 1 kung oo. Ayan. So I will end muna my discussion about the basics of experimentation. We will continue on Thursday. We will be dealing with the next part. We will evaluate the operational definition. So paano ba natin masasabi na yung operational definition natin is valid and reliable? And the last part of the discussion next meeting would be, we will evaluate the experiment using the internal validity. So paano natin ma-ensure na mataas ang internal validity ng ating experiment? By of course controlling the extraneous variables. Ano ba yung extraneous variables? Ano ba yung confounder or confounding variables? And of course, ano ba yung mga classic threat na pwede nating ma-encounter during an experiment? So that would be next meeting. So stop ko na yung recording, upload ko na lang to later.